I'm sure this will be extremely uncontroversial given the recent poll I did for my audience, but I promise I will explain exactly what I mean by this. I really don't like the multiverse thing. I think it's bizarre, out of place, and doesn't work with almost every single kind of writing that exists. Now, I will present an example of how I think it does work later, but for now, allow me to explain. But first, let's set the stage. The multiverse. Hobby of every physics freshman and theory of zero physics graduates. Basically, it's the idea that there are parallel universes that are nearly identical to the one we live in now, but with subtle to extreme changes depending on variables. The multiverse has had a very storied and bizarre history. From what I could tell, the first piece of television media to explore the concept was a 1963 episode of The Twilight Zone. In this episode, called The Parallel, a man returns home from a space voyage and finds that his world is not the same as when he left. But it was actually 2 years before that the idea made its way to comic books. In 1961, DC introduced the idea of a multiverse into The Flash, issue number 123, and in its proper tradition, Marvel took the idea the literal next year after DC did it with their Fantastic Four issue number 103. Although the idea was bandied about during the 1940s and 50s, it was presented as mirror characters rather than any established continuity, and it was more just in the interest of explaining redesigns for popular heroes. The concept stayed popular throughout the 1970s, but it wasn't until 1985 that the multiverse became a much more common trend. And that was in large part thanks to the introduction of DC's most powerful supervillain, the Anti-Monitor. The Anti-Monitor was presented as an extra-universal lunatic who wanted to end all life not only in this universe, but all universes. And now it's time for me to tell you that DC admitted that the reason they did all this multiverse stuff in the first place was because that way they could retcon obvious continuity errors in their story, and not because they thought it would be a good way to tell better stories, but more on that later. So why does the multiverse not work? Well, there's 3 main reasons. Reason number 1, unnecessary confusion. So if there's a multiverse, and like I said, fantastically, both Marvel and DC have adopted this trend, so thanks for that, guys. But anyway, if there's a multiverse, does that mean that there's an infinite number of Michael Keaton Batmans? Like a literal infinite number of Michael Keaton Batmans that all only have the most subtle and singular differences imaginable between them? Or alternatively, does that mean that for every Michael Keaton Batman with a subtle difference, there is an equal infinite number of Michael Keaton Batmans with just 2 differences? Like, just for an example, let's say we have one Michael Keaton Batman. And this Batman is the one you all know and love from the 1989 movie. So he's got an infinite number of Michael Keaton Batmans that all live the exact same life. But one day, they had a different breakfast. Only one day. Other than that, they're exactly the same. All of these Michael Keaton Batmans live the exact same life. But that means there's also an infinite number of Michael Keaton Batmans that also live that exact same life, but on 2 days had a different breakfast. And that's the only difference between them. So then we just extrapolate on that for infinity, and it starts to give you a headache, right? But here's another question. Doesn't that also mean that there are infinite numbers of the Anti-Monitor? So how could it be that in 0 of these universes, he ever succeeded and destroyed the universe? Or is it just that some things are similar in each universe, but not others? Like, there's always a Batman, but he just looks different, and there's only one Michael Keaton Batman? And if so, why? How does that work? If it's not a continuum, and these universes aren't connected in any way, like they're just singularities that created different universes, then why is there a Batman in this universe and in this one? Do you see the problem here? It's confusing. Unnecessarily confusing. That doesn't seem like a great idea for writing a story, does it? It seems like all it does is bog down the story with a lot of eye-crossing complications, so I have another idea. What if we made it so there was just one Batman, and that Batman is the one in the story. Point number 2, no consequences. If there are truly an infinite number of universes in a story, then why does anything that happens matter? I'm not talking about this from an existential standpoint right now, by the way. I'll get to that later. I mean, why do any of the struggles of the characters matter if there are infinite other versions of those characters from the audience's perspective? Like, why does it matter that we defeated Thanos if there's infinite other versions of Thanos who are virtually identical? And according to the comics themselves, there are also infinite Infinity Stones. So there's a literal never-ending number of Thanoses to come back and threaten the universe in an infinite loop. This means that every single time that the characters overcome a challenge, it means absolutely nothing because there's an infinite loop of other villains that pose the exact same threat. And then in that case, if there's an infinite version of these characters, doesn't that mean that if the hero dies, it doesn't really matter because there's infinite other versions of them that are virtually identical to the one who died? The only thing I could think of that would make this even less impactful is if the characters managed to find a version of the universe where they literally just went back in time and stopped that exact same version of the character from dying, so there's not even a different version that has to take their place. Oh yeah, they did that multiple times. Just a side note, but why do so many of these multiverse stories also feature time travel? Like, is it not already confusing enough? Back to the point, though, why does anything that happens matter if there's absolutely no consequences, and in fact negative consequences to anything that happens in the story? No permanence to death, to victory, or achievements of any kind. It just saps all the tension out of the story and makes it so you don't really care about what happens anymore. You know that Batman can't really die, so why does it matter when he goes up against the big villain? And you also know that even if he does defeat the villain, there's an infinite other number of the same villain anyway. Point number 3. The multiverse and its singular utility as a storytelling device does not fit with the themes of the stories that it is most often used in. Allow me for a brief moment to go into a hypothetical. If there are infinite universes, that means that there is a 50-50 chance that for every universe made out of matter, there is an equal and opposite universe made out of antimatter. So how do we know that when Spider-Man pulls another Spider-Man from a different universe that he isn't an antimatter Spider-Man? And for those of you who don't know why that would be a bad thing, allow me to bring in an expert to explain that.
If there was an anti-me made out of antimatter, that person in principle could look exactly like me. Same personality quirks, same everything, except of course when I decide to shake his hand. At that point, we both would blow ourselves to smithereens in a gigantic nuclear explosion.
So doesn't that add an additional layer here of existentialism that every time Spider-Man or the Avengers try to bring back a deceased loved one, there's a 50% chance that they'll just die the moment they touch them? But perhaps most horribly of all, if there has to be these subtle differences in each universe for them to have separated in the first place, then that means in this universe, Gwen Stacy was always meant to die here. This is the universe where she dies, and no matter what, Spider-Man never could have saved her. Now let me ask you, is that the theme of Spider-Man? Is that the tone of Spider-Man? No, it's not. Now, I know all you DC fans out there, and for the record, I'm a hardcore DC fan myself, Marvel sucks. I know that all of you are going to tell me that existentialism is important to DC because DC is darker and more profound. But here's the thing. There's a difference between existentialism and profundity. Let's take it back to Marvel for a second. This is profound, okay?
It was my dream.
Sometimes, to do what's right, we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most. Even our dreams.
But it's not really existential, is it? Maybe a little bit, but the point is, there's consequences and it fits with the wholesome tone of the story. And when you start introducing the concept of no consequences, you muddle the themes of these very characters and what makes them who they are. Bruce Wayne became Batman because he originally wanted to get revenge against the criminals of Gotham, but Over time, it evolved into a philosophy of valuing life and rehabilitation over punitive punishment. Remember this scene?
No. If I hadn't gotten scared.
It was nothing that you did. It was him, and him alone. Do you understand?
Well, this had more of an impact than just making Bruce hate Joe Chill. Over the course of his life, he learned to truly understand what Alfred meant, and that if he ever decides to take a human life, he would become a murderer, just like Joe. It would be him, and him alone, who took that life. He learns responsibility for his actions, and in the process learns to control his emotions and even forgive people who have wronged him. But with the multiverse, why would that matter? Bruce never would have become Batman because he could have just brought his parents back like it was nothing. The multiverse completely destroys the tones and themes of these stories and renders them meaningless. And I know that with the advent of sapping all the color and fun out of superhero movies, we tend to forget, but superheroes are supposed to be super. They're supposed to be fun, funny, and they're really pretty simple. We don't need to delve into nihilism with every single superhero in the world. It's novel sometimes, but it's become the norm, and I hate it. Now, I promised I'd mention an example of how the multiverse can be done well, and now I'm going to do that with the Spider-Verse. Now, the Spider-Verse is a unique take on the concept because... Nah. Get that out of here. We'll talk about that in another video. Spider-Verse, its own thing. It gets its own video. No, what I'm actually going to talk about is Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty does this concept really well, and if you want my in-depth thoughts about that, I made a whole video about it. But the reason why Rick and Morty does this well is because the entire theme of the show is existentialism and nihilism. And so you can manifest that very clearly through a multiverse. Because the whole point of the show is the multiverse, and all of the meaning that it saps from Rick's life is essentially a metaphor for his own feelings of nihilism and dread. He feels anger at the fact that his family was taken away from him for no reason, and that he's essentially a prisoner to his own hypocrisy because of it. He wants to view the world as a cold and dismal place without meaning, and yet he can't escape from the fact that his entire motivation in life is avenging the same people he tries to pretend are meaningless to him. And that works for a story about existentialism and meaning in a depressive mindset. But you know what's not about that? Spider-Man. Spider-Man is about a guy who swings around on webs and beats up criminals and delivers pizza and takes pictures in his spare time. Now, like I said, I don't mean to suggest that these stories can't have extreme profundity. I've been brought to tears from superhero movies in the past. But the multiverse and its themes fundamentally don't mesh with these stories. And so I think we need to stop doing it. Please. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Now, I know I sort of teased everybody with the Spider-Verse thing in the thumbnail. I literally just couldn't think of any other movie that typified it better than Spider-Verse. And for those of you who want to hear my thoughts on that series, I have some ideas for multiple different videos on it, actually. I think that series in particular has so many different angles to it and so many different things that I would want to talk about that really I could probably make 2 or 3, maybe even 4 videos about the Spider-Verse, to be honest with you. So I didn't want to just kind of cram in my thoughts about it in this video because it's such a short video. So anyway, I have plenty to say on it, and if you really do want to hear my thoughts about it, I can definitely whip something up very easily. Anyway, like the video if you liked it, or dislike the video if you didn't like it, and subscribe for more. That's all for now.